Hello, welcome to Atheist Torah Study. My name is Emma, and today we're going to be looking at Parsha Vayishlach. That's Genesis chapter 32, verse 4. So I'm going to say the blessing for Torah study, and then I'll kind of explain what Atheist Torah Study is real quick for people who hadn't heard of it before. And then we'll get into the text. So first here's the blessing for Torah study. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzvanu la'asok dvrei Torah. It just basically means we're kind of blessing this opportunity to study Torah. So the Torah, in case you've never been here before, is the first 5 books of the Christian Bible. But in Jewish, it's the standalone book. It's the Torah. It's the sacred text of Jewish tradition. There's more. There's also the Tanakh. But Jews, we really study the Torah. The Torah is a big deal in Judaism. And it's really a foundation of Jewish religious identity. The Torah was written... some people say that the stories started being composed as early as like 3,000 years ago. From my understanding, I mean, I was taught 2 stories, and one of them I've learned since I started doing this atheist Torah study. So one story is that the Torah was written around the time of the Babylonian exile, around 586 BC, when, according to Jewish tradition, the elites in Jewish culture were taken into captivity, and they were exiled to Babylon, and they lived there for 70 years. And when they came back, during the time of Ezra and Josiah, they wrote the Torah. So that's one story. But a more recent story that really makes more sense to me is that the Torah was probably written around the time of the Library of Alexandria, probably in the 3rd century BC. And it was probably written because at that time the Jews of Alexandria had access to a lot of religious texts from around the world, and they began to see that putting together the text of your tradition into a cohesive narrative was a new kind of writing. It was a new kind of narrative. And they wanted to make something that really reflected and captured what they understood Judaism to be. So it doesn't matter, whatever it is. My name is Emma. I'm an atheist. I don't believe that there is a God anywhere. I believe that this is all made up. I don't believe in a heaven or hell. I don't believe that there's a soul. I think that the world is completely as it appears to be. And I don't think there's any magic tricks. So, but I think that the Torah, the Tanakh, I think that almost any religious tradition has really interesting things to say. I mean, it has really interesting stories to share and really amazing things to offer. Because at the time that people wrote these stories, they wrote stories that made sense to them. And they passed them on to us, for good or for bad. They've informed the narrative of how we understand the world. And they give us a whole bunch of things. They give us ethics, they give us laws, they give us... I mean, for me, what really interests me most about studying Torah is that it's a connection with the past. I mean, every time I study Torah, I feel like I'm an archaeologist. And like I'm going for like a little while, once a week. I'm stepping all the way back into the lives of people from the Bronze Age, into the Iron Age. And kind of looking at the world a little bit through how a few people looked at the world that way. So that's what's interesting to me about it, and that's why I do this. And in Judaism, we read one Parsha a week. The Torah, which, like I said, is the first 5 books of the Bible, is broken up into 54 Parshas in accordance with the Jewish calendar. And then each Parsha is also broken up into 3 sections. So we would do one section every year. So that's basically how it works. So like a Parsha is maybe like 5 or 6 chapters of the Torah. Sometimes it's less. And then each year we read a third of that Parsha. So that's how we do it. But I'm not going to exactly go that way. I'm just going to do the full Parsha since I never get through more than a few verses anyways. I'm going to try to be better today and get through more. Anyway, so today's Parsha is Vayishlach. It's more about the story of Jacob and Rachel and Leah and all their children and kind of what happens to them. So this is the story of, we're still in the part of the Torah, which is kind of about, the Torah is like the first book of the Torah is the creation of the world. And then it's this long it's this long story. It's kind of a short form novel about the lives of this one family. And in the Torah, the family is chosen by God. So I don't know why the Torah is written this way, but that's how it's written in the story. This person is chosen by God, and their family is chosen by God. So for me as an atheist, I think one way that I understand this is I think that everybody feels like they're chosen in a way. If you're lucky enough to be born, and if you're also lucky enough to have consciousness, then it's really exceptional. And, you feel kind of like you won the lottery because you sort of did. And during the short time on earth that you're alive, it's a really great thing. And then also to think that you can reproduce yourself. Well, not yourself. You never reproduce yourself. To think that nature has created a way in which you can reproduce with another person and then there's more people is really cool. And I think that just the combination of those two things, like the amazingness of just existing and then the amazingness of like reproducing, the way that everything has ever since the beginning of life on Earth, is really impressive, and I think that that's where the idea of chosenness comes from. So, it doesn't surprise me that that Jews would take a certain kind of narrative about chosenness and really apply it to themselves. I think that it's a narrative that belongs to most cultures. Anyway, so let's get into the text. Vayishlach. And so again, if you're looking for some resource, there's things that I use sometimes to help kind of, to prepare. Or that I've spent a lot of time reading. So one of those is Richard Friedman's book about the Torah. That's a really good book. Another one is, I go to Sefaria. So another resource I use Sefaria a lot. So there's a lot of other books too. The Women's Torah Commentary, In Their Eyes, there's Torah Queries. There's a lot. If you go back to some previous episodes, I go over some of the places that I go to get commentary. And then I also, for my commentary, I spend a lot of time on YouTube. I actually find a lot of stuff on YouTube about Torah, and it's really helpful. If you're looking through YouTube to get Torah commentary, you kind of have to understand what you're looking for, though. So, if you go to YouTube, maybe I'll do a whole video about, going through Torah commentary on YouTube. But if you're looking on YouTube, you kind of have to be a little discriminating and sort it out. So one of the first things that you really need to know about YouTube is that YouTube is just chock full of Torah commentary from fundamentalist Christians, so or messianic Jews, and it's not that that's bad. I mean, I don't have anything against. I think if messianic Jews want to do Torah commentary, that's fine. I'm not saying anything about that. But I mean, you have to be really discriminating because they're always going to, everything that they do is always going to go to this idea that they have that, that Jesus is the Messiah. And the problem with that is that Jews, like, we don't believe that, I mean, it's just so utterly offensive to say that, like, that a God could become a man. I mean, that's just like the least Jewish thing that there is. And that's a very pagan idea, but that's what Christians believe. Christians believe that God became man, and that's fine if Christians want to believe that. Jews don't really believe that. Of course, me, I'm an atheist, so I don't believe any of it. So, but again, I get a lot of really. What I find is a really good trick if you want to study Torah and you want to pick up on some commentaries from YouTube, because there's so many good ones. Like, first of all, look for something that's being led by a real rabbi, like, I mean, from a real synagogue. That's a great way to go. And then if you can listen to one that was a Zoom, those are even better, because if it's a Zoom, it means that the rabbi is leading a Torah study, but that, like, people are, asking questions and they're trying to figure stuff out. So that's even better. Anyway, so let's get started. I'm really going to try to actually read the Torah this time. I'm usually really bad about this, but I'm trying to be better. Okay, so here goes. Vayishlach. Genesis chapter 32, verse 4. Jacob sent messengers ahead of his brother Esau in the land of Seir, in the country of Edom. So in the Torah, Esau is considered an Edomite. Esau is the brother of Jacob. And the story is a story about it's a story about, what did they call that? Fraternal competition between brothers. And in this story, there's a winner and there's a loser, which I totally don't believe in. I mean, I think that you shouldn't practice favoritism among your children. I mean, I know that parents do it anyways, but I don't think that you should. And I mean, the story, it's really a kind of a terrible story. Because when you look at the story, it's like, basically the story is that Jacob has gotten the blessing of his father, and he's also got the blessing of God. And then Esau doesn't get the blessing. And it's like, what kind of a story is that? I mean, these people both were just born. They didn't have any choice over how they were born or what they did. And Jacob didn't necessarily get the blessing from his merit. As a matter of fact, the story is kind of like he has a bunch of problems, and his problems are because of his ethics, And in a way, he kind of got the blessing because he conspired with his mother to trick his father. So that's the story. Now, somehow you're supposed to take out of that the idea that there's something ethical about God. And, I don't know. I mean, that's just the story. I'm just kind of telling you where the story's at right now. So right now, Jacob and Esau are both grown men. And, like, we're already into, like, Hollywood territory here, where, like, there's these two men and they're going to, like, Jacob is afraid that he's going to have a big battle with Esau, and the Esau's going to try to kill him. Because in the Torah, the other thing is that there's a lot of people killing each other. It happens all the time. Oh my God, there's so much people killing each other. It's just, the Torah is a big bloody It's a big bloody battlefield of dead bodies, and there's always these people trying to kill each other. So Jacob is afraid that Esau is gonna try to kill him. So Jacob is like trying to be really, um, he's trying to be like apologetic, conciliatory, and he's trying to make amends a little bit, not much, but a little bit. He's trying to make amends with his brother. But the story is good because I think that there actually is a lot of depending on how you raise your children, you can easily raise your children where there's a lot of competition. The sense that your kids have to compete with each other, and that can be really unhealthy for the kids. It leads to a lot. I wish that the Torah would, in addition to telling the story of Jacob and Esau, tell a story about a family like that's not dysfunctional, like where everybody gets along really well and they're kind of working stuff out. But you have to go to modern literature to find stories like that. And maybe this is like, maybe the truth is people don't want to read stories like that. Maybe like the redactors of the Torah already understand something about literature that's going to be the theme for the next 2,000 years of literature. People like a good story where there's a victim, where there's a hero, where there's a sense of wrongdoing, where there's kind of some sense of justice. People like a complicated story. And this is complicated, it is. So Jacob sent messengers. He's a wealthy man. He has a lot of resources. And so he sent messengers ahead to his brother Esau. So his brother has also done very well for himself, and he has a lot of resources too. But they're separated. So Jacob sent messengers ahead to his brother Esau in the land of Seir, in the country of Edom, and instructed the servants as follows: Thus shall you say to my lord Esau, Thus says your servant Jacob, I stayed with Laban and remained until now. So he's basically telling, this is like at a time before the internet, before text messaging, and before it's like Signal. And so they haven't talked in at least 14 years. I think probably longer than that. And he's basically just telling him, he's like sending him a letter and telling him about his life. And he's saying, what we know from the previous Parsha. He went to Laban, his father-in-law, because he was he wanted to marry Rachel, but first he had to marry Leah. So he married Leah and Rachel, and he had to stay 14 years to get 2 wives. And now he's telling him everything that happened. So he says this. He says, Thus shall you say to my lord Esau, Thus says your servant Jacob, I stayed with Laban and remained with him until now. Now. There's not a lot of now in the Torah, but here's a now moment. I have acquired cattle, asses, sheep, and male and female slaves, and I send this message to my lord in the hope of gaining your favor. So, you can't go about 3 verses in the Torah without being offended. So for me, the part that offends me right away is talking about male and female slaves and just kind of normalizing it. The Torah spends a lot of time normalizing slavery. We talk about this a lot in different Torah studies I've been to. The thing that people always say all the time is, oh, that's just what was normal back then. And it is true, of course, it is true that slavery was practiced in many cultures at the time of the Levant. That is true. But that doesn't mean it's ethical. And I don't think that people who are being held up as models or as something you're supposed to follow in the Torah should be having slaves, because you're basically taking somebody against their will and you're making them serve you. And it sets a terrible precedent, But there's a lot of slavery. There's going to be a lot of slavery here, and it's horrible. And there's utterly no defense for it. It's just, it's barbaric, and it really tells you a lot about the time in which this was written. I mean, it tells you that this is a time when people didn't have freedoms and rights that we have today, and that there's really no explanation for it. I mean, for a long time, people were free. There wasn't slavery. I mean, I'm sure that people tried to make other people do things, but slavery is something that happened when civilization started. It's a byproduct of, certain kinds of civilization. And it's really terrible. It's a terrible, terrible thing. It's like there's so many offensive things about being human. There's just so many. Warfare, inequality, environmental destruction. There's just so many horrible things that human beings do. And slavery is one of them. And here's somebody bragging about having slaves, so that's terrible. Anyways, so the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, "We came to your brother Esau. He himself is coming to meet you, and his retinue numbers 400. So the messengers are just telling Jacob that his brother has 400 people with him. Because Esau is a big deal too. He's become a big deal. And but what Jacob is reading in the story is that Esau is coming to kill him, because he's been carrying that around in his head the whole time. And I think that if there's something good that I can pull out of the story, besides that this is a story about brothers, it's a very real story about brothers, because, I mean, there's just so many examples in literature of stories about siblings where they don't really get along, or they're competing with each other for resources. And, just because people are siblings doesn't mean that they're going to be friends or anything. And if they're lucky, they won't be enemies. So, but so that's one part of the story that is, to me, redeeming about it. But there's, what is that? Oh, kitty. Oh, there's a cat, sorry. The cat's, no, kitty, no, don't, that's not for you to play with. Sorry, there's a cat there. Anyways, but there's another part of the story here too, and I think this is the Torah in it. The part, like in this very at the beginning of this chapter, that I think is really valuable, is that the story reminds you that Jacob, who doesn't really know what's going on with with Esau, has been carrying around this fear of his brother for like almost an entire generation, maybe almost 20 years. He's been carrying around this idea. And it's like, for your average person at that time, I mean, they didn't live forever. I mean, if they lived to be 60 or 70, like most people do now, or 80, they did pretty well for themselves. So, for anywhere from like a third of his life, he's carrying around inside of him this incredible burden of that he's basically cheated his brother out of something, and then he's afraid of his brother because of what he did, and he's had this fear for his life the whole time. He's been doing all this other stuff, and it's like that's such a huge burden that Jacob's had to carry around with him. And Jacob has a lot of moments like this in the Torah. He has a lot of like kind of moments of awakening where you as a listener or as a reader who are connecting with the story are really given this great opportunity to connect with Jacob. And this is another one of those opportunities because Jacob is carrying this huge burden of, basically having screwed his brother. And now it's coming back, and he thinks his brother wants to kill him. But the thing is, his brother doesn't want to kill him. His brother, I guess, wants something else. Maybe his brother, who knows what his brother wants. Maybe his brother wants redemption. Maybe he wants reconciliation. Maybe he wants a truce. There's a lot of options here. But this is also kind of reminding us, going back just a little bit to the beginning of the book of Genesis, to when Cain and Abel killed, when because that was the first fratricide. And it's like you think to yourself, well, why, like the first two children in the world, what did they do? Like one wants to kill the other. Like this is like the very first thing they want to do. They don't want to build something together. They want to kill each other. So there's this undercurrent in the book. I mean, there's a lot of people trying to kill each other. Like I said, I mean, if we go back just a little bit further, there was Abraham was actually told by God to kill Isaac, and then he brought Isaac up and was going to kill him like you kill an animal, and then God's like, oh no, never mind, I was just testing you. It's like, I mean, what are you supposed to do with that? That's just nuts, Oh God, I'm glad we didn't talk about that one this time around, but we'll get to it. The Akedah, it's really an important thing in Judaism. So the messengers, verse 8, Jacob was greatly frightened. In his anxiety, he divided the people with him and the flocks and herds and camels into two camps. So Jacob has all of his stuff with him. It's like he's got his trailer, his RV, and he's got all his goods packed in his U-Haul, whatever. He's on a caravan. And he's thinking, if Esau comes to the one camp and attacks it, the other camp may yet escape. So he's being strategic. Like I said, I mean, he thinks that his brother wants to kill him. Then Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham, and God of my father Isaac, O Hashem, who said to me, return to your native land, and I will deal bountifully with you. So now he's praying to this God. And it's interesting because, he doesn't really talk about the God like he's really connected with it, like he has some kind of personal relationship with the God. He's kind of praying to a God the way that people all over the ancient world prayed to gods. He's basically like, he's queued up, he's in a moment of anxiety, he's afraid for his safety, and he thinks that now's the time when you ask the deity for a favor because you don't know what's going to happen. And the really brilliant part of this, the part that, like, to me again is Torah, it's not about that there's a God that's going to give him something. It's about his fear because he's afraid of facing up to the consequences of his choices. And so he's afraid to face up to the consequences of his choices. And that's what's really going on for him. Like, if there's anything that's, a God, like for me in the Torah, like if there's a God in the Torah, it's like your conscience. Your conscience is like a part of your brain that's formed through a lot of societal conditioning, but you also have a little bit of wiggle room in terms of how you decide you're going to kind of deal with the world. And you have the opportunity to kind of examine your motivations for why you want to do something. You have a chance to anticipate your actions ahead of time and to think about how to be whatever you think ethical is. And if there's anything good about the Torah, it's that it provides some examples of like where people experience that. So So we're about halfway through. I'm going to just take a break and I'll be back in a minute and we'll continue on for the second half of Atheist Torah study. Again, we're in portion, we're in Vayishlach, right? In Vayishlach. Yeah, we're in Vayishlach, chapter 32, verse 10. And I'll be back in a little bit. Hi, I'm back. So we're going to continue with Parsha Vayishlach. Then Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham's house, and God of my father Isaac's house, O Hashem, who said to me, return to your native land, and I will deal bountifully with you. I just commented on that. I am unworthy of all the kindness you have so steadfastly shown your servant. With my staff alone I crossed the Jordan, and now I have become two camps. So here he's praying. As an atheist, I don't really understand what prayer is, I have to be honest. I don't pray. And, I understand that people do pray. Prayer is a big part of Jewish tradition. It's a part that I don't talk about much, but it's a really big part of Jewish tradition. Jews, we have something called a Siddur, which is a prayer book. And every Saturday on Shabbat, Jews gather in a synagogue and they pray and they have a service. And the service is could be 2 or 3 hours long. And it has all these parts to it. It has a structure. It's almost like a ritual. It kind of is in a way. And the center of it is reading the Torah. But there's all these prayers along the way too. And a lot of the prayers are kind of like this. There's prayers for health and healing, prayers for peace, prayers for Israel, prayers for the community, just all kinds of prayers. And, atheists, I think one thing most atheists have in common, is that we don't pray. And, but I don't think that discounts the intention of what prayer is about. Like here, Jacob is praying. And he's praying for some kind of a solution. He's got a problem. His problem is that he thinks his brother is coming to kill him, and that he's going to destroy everything that he's accumulated. So he's praying. But I think the real story here is that his brother's not going to do that. And so it's in Jacob's head. And because it's in his head, the praying probably is doing him some good, because he's having to come to terms with his conscience. And here his conscience is kind of presented as the divine being. But it's really just him, just kind of coming to terms with himself. And, I think that prayer can be something very psychological. It's something, it doesn't really matter if you pray or not. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen on earth. But, when people say prayers, some prayers maybe can remind you about that there's good in the world, that people are capable of doing good. I don't know. I don't really have a lot to say about prayers, but there's not actually a lot of praying in the Torah. which is another topic. Yeah. There's not a lot of praying in the Torah. There's some. But the Torah is really, it's kind of interesting because in the story here, he's praying. But generally in the Torah, the way that people deal with, like normally you would think you would deal with a prayer like for a sin or something like that. Or if you want something transactional. And in the ancient world, the idea was that if you were doing something transactional, you would actually make a sacrifice. You wouldn't really make a prayer. Now, Judaism changed radically in the year 70 or so AD when the Jewish temple was destroyed. And when the temple was destroyed and when Rome destroyed Israel and turned it into Palestine, when Rome did that, at some point after that, Rabbi Akiva and the rabbis invented a new system for how to do Jewish ritual, and it was based on the idea of prayer. So it changed from temple sacrifice to praying. And that was a big change in Jewish culture because until that time, I mean, obviously there was prayer in the Torah, and there's some tradition of prayer. Although it's really interesting because there's not a lot of praying in the Torah, at least not in this part of the Tanakh. It's probably more praying later on in the Tanakh. But in the Torah itself, there isn't so much praying. It's not so much of a thing. Like if people are going to talk to the divine in the Torah, they tend to talk to the divine directly. They tend to talk to the God figure as if he's right there in the room. A lot of times they just don't even, it's not a thing. Anyways, so here's Jacob and he's praying. I'll go on. Deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau. Else I fear he may come and strike me down, mothers and children alike. So in his mind, Esau is really turned into this monster. But it's just in his head. I mean, I don't know that I remember anything specifically in the Torah where Esau said he was going to... I think I could see how Esau would want revenge on Jacob, but to think that Esau would kill his own brother's wife and children too seems like this is going on in Jacob's head. And it's like Jacob is just thinking the most horrible things, And it says something about what we can imagine in our own eyes, too. So then he says, Yet you have said, I will deal bountifully with you, and make your offspring as the sands of the sea, which are too numerous to count. After spending the night there, he selected from what was at hand these presents for his brother Esau: 200 she-goats, 20 he-goats, 200 ewes, and 20 rams. So basically, he's just saying that, there's more here. Sorry. 30 milch camels with their colts, 40 cows, 10 bulls, 20 she-asses. It's always fun whenever you have, and 10 he-asses. These he put in charge of his servants, drove by drove, and he told his servant, go on ahead and keep a distance between the droves. So, he, first he prays. You could think of this as setting an example of how you reconcile. Maybe in his heart, what he wants to do is reconcile. But in order to reconcile, first he has to come to terms with his past, And so maybe he has to go through all of the inner turmoil that you go through when you're sort of coming to terms with your choices in your life. If you made choices and they caused you some sort of anxiety or some kind of grief, and you sat with them for a long time, but you didn't really know what to do with those feelings. I mean, you're in a good place, according to my understanding of the Torah, because at least you have a conscience and you have some sense of what's right and wrong. But I mean, there's also the things that people do that they're just not even conscious of. And to me, those are the things that are really devastating. Like when I think about the future of the world, when I think about the future of people, like I think we all in the West, especially in America, like everybody, we drive everywhere. And we're now at a point on the planet where like global warming is really starting to affect the planet. And it's just going to get worse and worse and worse. And for the last 100 years, people have been basically destroying the future. And they think that that's just normal. They think that the way that they get around in their cars is normal and that they have a right to it. And that, everything about our world as we understand it is based on this technology. And like to me, the things that are in the Torah that are the real dangers are the things that you're doing or you're choosing to do that you're not even aware of what a problem it is, or what a problem it's creating. And human beings are full of that reality. And I think God is one of those things. I mean, I think that the idea of God might in some places and times might have been a good idea, and it still might be a good idea in some places, but the idea of God is also such a toxic idea, and it causes it causes people to do terrible things. Like recently, people who had religious beliefs felt so strongly about their religious beliefs in this country that they partnered with political leaders who were so, who were so avaricious and so greedy and so desiring of power that they were willing to make deals with religious people who wanted to take away women's rights. And they're doing that in the name of their religious belief, in the name of their God. And so it's one of those places like where people have this blind faith in their God or what their idea of God is to such an extent that they're willing to take away other people's freedom because they believe that that's their right. And those are the kind of areas where like, like you don't, those are those kind of blind spots, like where you don't even really have something in the Torah that really fundamentally addresses it, or in the Christian Bible for that matter. Because if you're believing in this thing that's telling you to take away other people's freedoms and other people's rights, then you're so far beyond the pale. And here at the beginning, we're right there too. Like, and I have to be honest, like one of the problems I have with Torah, and I've always had it with Torah ever since I started studying Torah, is that nowhere in the Torah is there really an honest examination of the concept of slavery and how it could be immoral. Like, I mean, I wish that the Torah condemned slavery. I mean, I don't see why somebody even 2,300 years ago couldn't have looked at slavery and said, oh, slavery is evil. Like this story that says Jacob had male servants and female servants, or actually, no, it doesn't say servants, slaves. It says male slaves and female slaves. Like, that's evil. That's wrong. And Jacob shouldn't have done that. Jacob didn't have any right to own another human being. And, it would have been nice if there was some place in the Torah where somebody even just said that once, And it could be that somebody did say that. And it could be that somebody said that and somebody else crossed it out or took it out. Because one of the other things about the Torah that, like, we don't really talk about that much is that the Torah is this document that we've gotten where so much of what was part of whatever traditions existed at the time was removed. And the place where we know that the best is the way in which the goddess and the expression of the female has been so totally redacted from the text. And it's been replaced with a jealous male deity. And what that tells you is that at the time that the Torah was redacted, the society was very heavily invested in taking away women's voices or the representation of the female. And that's fundamental to how the Torah is written and understood, is that it's a document that has worked in so many different kinds of ways to take away the female voice. In spite of that, the female voice still comes through really strongly, but it takes a lot more looking. I mean, you really have to sift through the layers. And it's really fun. I mean, it is a little bit like being an archaeologist. Although you're just working with ideas. So it's not really like being an archaeologist. But it's a fun metaphor, even if it's not really true. So here's Jacob, and he's praying. And then now, after he's done praying, then he's going to offer transactional items. He's, going to give them animals. So he prays, and then he offers transactional items. And then he tells his servants to go out and meet his brother Esau. And he says to his servants, he instructed the one in front as follows: when my brother Esau meets you and asks you, who is your master, where are you going, and whose animals are these ahead of you, you shall answer, your servant Jacob. They are a gift sent to my lord Esau. Jacob himself is right behind us. He gave similar instructions to the second one and the third, all the others who followed the droves, namely, thus and so shall you say to Esau when you reach him. And you shall add, and your servant Jacob himself is right behind us. For he reasoned, if I propitiate him with presents in advance, and then face him, perhaps he will show me favor. So, it sounds like Jacob is being rational according to whatever it is with his own fear. He's sort of feeling like, and, in a way this isn't really a story that you really have to pay attention to the details of these two characters. Because like so many other things in the Torah, in a way it's not really meant to be like this story that you read where you just kind of look at the characters as detached, disembodied characters who are just some sort of text that you randomly study. You're actually, in the Torah, you're supposed to be the text. Like, you're supposed to know the text so well that it's imprinted on your soul. Of course, as an atheist, I don't believe we have a soul, but your memory, your brain, same thing. So it's supposed to be imprinted in your brain, whatever this means. And so here what it means is that if you've done something wrong, then here's an example of how to make it right. So, step number 1, you admit that you're in an uncertain, unstable, shaky place and that you're afraid. So that's like step number 1 is you admit your fear, which Jacob has done. He lived with his fear for 20 years. Now he's finally going to confront it. So that's like step number 1. And then step number 2 is you run through this in your head. You examine your conscience, which is sort of what Jacob's doing when he's praying. Now for a religious person, it's like you pray. But since this is atheist Torah study, we're not going to pray. But step number 2 is you examine your conscience. And examining your conscience is something that you should be doing all the time in your life. Like, it's not something that you just do about something that you've done really wrong. It's something that you should always be doing all the time. But you should definitely do it if you're trying to repair a broken relationship. which is, I think, what Jacob's actually trying to do. Step number 3, you put something into it that really counts, So Jacob is sending all these gifts ahead of time because he's trying to show that it's not just that he has looked at his fear and that he's examined his conscience, but he's also doing something tangible, something that really is going to cost him something. He's offering something that would cost him something, and that's some of his wealth. He's offering it to his brother. And this is everything that he's doing before he even approaches his brother. So he's already doing all these things. These are a series of steps that you do if you're trying. It's giving you a guideline for how you yourself can examine broken relationships in your life if you want to address those. And as an atheist, I can respect that. It's one way to do something. So, verse 22, and so the gift went on ahead while he remained in camp that night. Oh, and there's actually a fourth thing too, and that is that you give space for the person who is your intended person you're reconciling with or repairing or whatever it is. You give them time to process. So you don't just walk up to them and say, "Oh, I'm sorry, forgive me, now give me your answer." You're giving them time. He's giving them time. First, he's sending these things ahead of time. He's letting them know he's there, and that has some reconciliation to do. So that same night he arose, and taking his 2 wives, maidservants, and 11 sons, he crossed the ford of the Jabbok. After taking them across the stream, he sent across all his possessions. Jacob was left alone. Oh, this is good. I'm glad we got to this before, because we're almost done. We're almost done with this hour, but this is good. This is the best part. Jacob was left alone, and a figure wrestled with him until the break of dawn. When he saw that he had not prevailed against the figure that wrestled with him, he wrenched Jacob's hip of his socket, so that the socket of his hip was strained, as he wrestled with him. Then he said, Let me go, for dawn is breaking. But he answered, I will not let you go until you bless me. Said the other, What is your name? He replied, Jacob. Said he, You shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with divine beings, and have prevailed. Jacob asked, Pray tell me your name. But he said, You must not ask my name. And he took leave of him there. So I don't know if you quite got that, if you didn't get it. So the story is, okay, Jacob is doing, I totally forgot about this. So Jacob is doing all this stuff because he's trying to reconcile with his brother. And then he sends everybody off. He's by himself. That's just the story. He's just by himself. And then that night, while he's by himself, a mysterious being comes in the night and wrestles all night with Jacob. And then he wrenches Jacob's hip socket. And Jacob, and then he renames Jacob Israel. So, and what that means is somebody who wrestles with God. So, I mean, I don't know what to do with this. I have to be honest. I don't really know exactly what to do with this. So, I mean, does it, in the story, is it God who comes to see Jacob? I mean, who is God? Who is this God that's coming to see Jacob? I mean, to me, it's obvious. The story is consistent all the way through. That night, he's dreaming, and in his dream, he's wrestling with his conscience, and his conscience is represented by the idea of God. And he's coming to terms with himself, and he chooses a new name for himself, and or he's given a new name, and he has a new mission. I mean, all of this stuff it's not the best. I mean, I think that at the time that this was written, as far as storytelling goes, it's supposed to be very mystifying, like this is a point in the story where you enter into something mystical. And I mean, I can understand what the storyteller is trying to say. Like, there's times in your life when things happen to you and just really, for a little while, you're just in such a state, whatever it is. It could be, when you got a job, or when your child was born, or when somebody died, or when something really significant happened. It could even be a storm or something. It could be anything. But the point is that it's a point when you experience some really profound transition or state of awareness or something, and you feel really connected with that moment. And that's what's happening to Jacob right here. I mean, he's having such a profound moment. I mean, he's fulfilling his destiny in a way. But he's wrestling with God. And in the process of wrestling with God, he's renamed Israel. And that to me, that's what this atheist Torah study is. Like, I'm wrestling with God too. I mean, I'm wrestling with the nothingness of existence. And that nothingness is amazing. And what humankind is produced out of the nothingness is amazing. And I'm wrestling with the abstract conceptualizations that my ancestors have put in front of me. And they've called those things God. And they're a receptacle for a whole set of ideas. And I'm trying to deconstruct those ideas. And I'm trying to find ways to make them meaningful, if there's anything that can be redeemed about them. And I think that in that way I'm wrestling with God in the same way that Jacob is here. He's wrestling with God. But for him, it's his conscience more than anything. It's really, like, I'd just like to end with that. He's wrestling with his conscience, and in the end he's transformed by doing that. That's a nice story. So anyways, thanks so much. You've been listening to Atheist Torah Study. This was Parsha Vayishlach. And next week is going to be another one of the V's. I can't remember which one is next. But anyways, we're still pretty deep in Genesis. If you would like to reach out, you can always reach me. You can write to me at atheisttorahstudy@gmail.com. And you can also find me on TikTok and YouTube at the @Atheist Torah Study. So thanks again so much for joining me for this week of Atheist Torah Study, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much, and take care.